the track. Let's go.
Oh, go, go.
He jumped her.
You stop, you stop. Come on, pressure. When you're building tires, you can either stud them on the rim or flat. But just keep in mind the difference in the profile. These are the exact same tires. And look how much different they look when they're mounted and inflated. So if you're going to run screws in without the tires mounted, it makes it easier because there's less changing to do, but just be mindful that the profile may change a little bit. Center won't matter, but if you're going to put studs in the side lugs, think that they may look a little different by the time you get air in them. And when you build front tires, studs down the middle do almost all the work. These ones on the sides are mostly for looks. If you don't have lugs that are almost the same height as the center ones, these studs will see very little load. The ice, these ones spend all their time on the ice. So they have to be away from the edge of the lug, or you will get too much force against the stud and it will cause the tread to split and you'll get a leak. Back tires, similar idea. Back tires, you end up with a lot more studs. These particular tires here have been through a number of races, and they're at the point where there was a bunch of broken studs. So these studs were replaced, they're going to be pulled out and replaced. Here's an example of one that we put fairly close to the edge of the outside lug like this, but the lug actually split. So this one will have to be plugged from the inside and it will be airtight again. But the point of showing these tires is, again, stud placement. These ones on the outside aren't really required. It's the ones down the middle that do all the work. Once you get the tire inflated, it gets a bit of a crown to it, and it's these lugs down the middle that take almost all the load from the quad spinning the tires. There's a couple trains of thought on stud placement. Putting them near only the front of the tread, because of course the tire is rotating this way and all the force is pushing backwards on it. Well, that only works when you're on the gas. Once you let off the gas, you start gearing down, the force actually pushes this way on the studs as your tires are working against the engine to slow down. So you got to be mindful that near the front is not a good idea if you put them too close. So you still have to think about, you definitely want some rubber between the edge of that head and the edge of the lug, otherwise it will split and they will leak. So this tire is in the process of all the broken studs have been removed from the inside. The studs that do break off look like this. The nuts stay intact on the inside and the studs snap off right below the head. So if you do have a stud break off in the tire, it will not leak. It will still hold air. All you end up with is a spot like this where you miss the head, but the shank of the stud actually becomes a tire plug. You only need to take these out if you want to put a fresh stud in and reuse the tire. If you break a couple studs off, you can just keep on riding and you will not get a flat. Now, there's been some talk about building new tires and the requirement for lube or tire sealant or washers. I think when people say washers, they're using the wrong terminology. They probably mean the lock nuts. This is a tire that we're in the process of building. These studs have been tightened down against the lug, so they're kind of set snug against the lug, and if they suck in a little bit, that's okay. It's better to have them a little tighter than too loose. And once again, you can see they're generally centered on the lug. On the inside of the tire, you can see how the studs poke through. So those are all poked through, and absolutely no sealant is required. These ones I'm reusing, so I put Loctite on them, and then you put your drill on the inside of that nut, hold a 1/4 inch wrench on the head of screw, or the stud I should say, and tighten the nut until you start to pull the stud into the tire. And once you start sucking the stud into the rubber lug, you're far enough and you're good to go. These studs will not leak. You'll put 200 holes in your tire and you will not have a leak. The only thing that will cause you a leak is, once again, if your stud is too close to the edge of the lug. Say if this stud was positioned out here for some reason, it will cause it to crack through the case. Doesn't matter if you have 6-ply tires or 4-ply tires, it will cause it to leak along the side of the stud. But again, if your stud breaks off, it won't cause a leak. Okay, so like I said earlier, we run the studs in from the outside, obviously, and then these ones, I just have 4 here for an example, where I've run the nuts on finger tight. I put some Loctite on them only because I'm reusing these studs for probably the 3rd set of tires. And the nylon lock nuts, officially, when you talk about nylon nuts, they're only meant for a one-time use. Although, even now, even though these have been used 3 times, you can't physically turn these on much tighter than what they are hand tight. So they'll probably never come off. But Loctite's cheap, so I just throw some Loctite on them when I reuse them. It's probably not required. It doesn't really take any longer, but I put some on there just for peace of mind. Probably not required, like I said, but I just do it out of habit now. If you're building tires for the first time, or I should say studding with fresh studs, this is absolutely not required. But now that I've been reusing these studs, they last so long. They're still sharp. You can still cut yourself on them after a few thousand kilometers of racing. And as long as they're not rusty or dull, or you don't run them on anything but ice, they last for a very long time. Hopefully this shows it well. So now I have some nuts on the inside ready to be tightened. So you take your 10mm socket on your wrench, on the nut. The ones I'm doing, turn the tire so you can see better, are these ones, for example. Hold the stud tight, tighten the nut until you start to pull the stud into the tire. Move on to the next one. Start sucking it in. There we go. So, these studs, you'll see now, are slightly recessed into the rubber. They're seated really well. Once this tire has 10 plus pounds of air in it, it won't look like they're sucked in so far, but you need to make sure that they're nice and tight. If they're sticking up, they're not going to last. And you can repeat that process about 200 times to build yourself a set. It's a slow process, but I don't mind doing it. Built lots of tires over the years. Now there's options to buy tires. There's guys that sell very good tires. Nothing wrong with buying your own tires, but if you want, there's nothing wrong with building your own tires either. Just depends what you want to do. So we figured we'd give a little direction in case anybody is interested in building instead of buying.